Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Carroll Connection. I'm your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. I did want to take a chance to shout out last week's episode 155, the Germany trip recap podcast. I had my cousin on, Jake Wickham, and we talked about our Germany trip. So we talked about what it was like in Bonbeck, Munich, Oktoberfest, what it means to travel internationally, the value of traveling. And I think it was a really great episode. It was great to get my cousin back on the podcast. He hadn't been on in a while. So please go check that episode out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. So if you'd like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search The Carroll Connection or Jared M. Carroll. It should pop up right for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll at The Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. And obviously, with the year coming up, the end of the year coming up, I should say, I'm wrapping things up. It's just be patient with me with booking. People do come home for the holidays, so I do try to get people who come home for the holidays back on the podcast if I can, or schedule them out. I'm pretty much almost done scheduling with November, looking towards December and January. So if you want to be a guest on the podcast, just be patient with me, and I will work with your schedule basically if I can. So that brings me to today's episode. Had a guest originally slotted for this week. Had to reschedule. You know how that goes. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes you just have to be quick with things. And as I've talked about recently, I don't typically like to do a bunch of solo episodes, but I haven't done one in a little bit. It's been like maybe a month or two since I've done one. And I've got scheduled at least my birthday reflection coming up next month that I'll be doing. And then at the end of the year, I do a year in review episode. I haven't completely decided if I'm going to include someone on that episode or not, so that might be another solo episode coming your guys' way. But for today, the title of this episode is Don't Force It. And going back to the fact of that I've talked about so many times of like not wanting to do a solo just to make content, I was like, I just don't want to force it. I don't want to force it. And then I was like, I can make a whole episode about not forcing it. And it's not just so much about content. It also goes into like your everyday life, whether you are in the gym training and you don't want to force the next lift, or if you don't want to train a certain day, take that mental health day, or if you're struggling at work with deadlines and projects that you've taken on, don't force things. Like let them happen naturally. And that even works in relationships and stuff like that as well. As you guys know, I've also been very open about my past dating struggles. Luckily, I've rectified that, and I'm in a really happy relationship right now. And I'll probably talk a little bit about that in relation to this topic of don't force it. But I think a lot of us will tend to force things when they don't have to necessarily be forced. And the issue with forcing things is you're making things kind of feel pressured. You're making things kind of tense on yourself. Like there's this added like feeling to things that don't feel authentic, don't feel genuine, and you don't want to go through life giving off that vibe to people or things or whatever you're trying to create. And for me, when I do a podcast, I don't typically like to just go on long rants. I like to hear and connect to people and have like real life conversations through my episodes. And this past year, I've really kind of shifted back towards that dynamic for myself, and I've taken my foot off the gas in terms of content. And not everything has to be content. I've learned that everything can be content, but it doesn't mean everything should be content. And I think a lot of people, when they're trying to pursue a career on social media or create their social media presence, will buy into that notion that you need to be creating nonstop. You need to be forcing it, post 5 to 7 times a day. And I did that once in my TikTok, and there is success in that. I'm not going to say that there's not, but you will lose your genuine, authentic self if you're just posting to post. And not saying that posting that many times will cause that. I'm saying that tends to dilute the quality of what you're making. And you don't want to dilute your quality of content. You don't want to dilute your personality. You don't want to dilute yourself. So you want to portray what you can across authentically, and that's why I say don't force it. Because if you're forcing things, people aren't just not going to absorb that the way that you want it to be absorbed, and I don't think that's great for a lot of people in this constant like post society. And it just relates to social media. Social media is a difficult thing to navigate, as many of you guys know that have been guests and do uh, content. You understand what goes into it, and with a lot of the stuff that I had, it wasn't just like a one day thing. I just didn't like force it necessarily. I kind of built it step by step and tried to learn things along the way. You learn things by collabing with people, you learn things by trial and error. And even like recently, this past year, I had an episode with Bobby Labossiere and Neil Fisher, and I had a camera malfunction, wrong SD card. I didn't even know that was a thing, and it messed up the whole video. And luckily, I had a second camera to record some of it, and I got their perspective of the conversation, just not me included, but the audio was there, thankfully, because I always record on a backup GarageBand, so I always have audio. But you're always learning as you go through things, and I think it's important to have that aspect to your day-to-day life, whether it is your career, whether it is in the gym, whether it is in your relationships. Like, you have to learn and experience things, and that's referencing even like last week's episode where me and Jake talked about travel. And what travel gives you is the chance to experience things from a different lens. You, especially when you travel internationally, you get to see that country's culture, the way that they live their day-to-day life, especially when you're visiting long term and you get to go through like the weekdays and stuff. You get to see people doing like their work stuff. You get people out of work, their coffee breaks, kids out of school, just like exploring the city, whatever it is. And I think that's really cool. And to continue with this like don't force it theme, I think a lot of us will apply pressure to things to make them happen the way that we want them to. And as you guys know, in terms of just like my relationship like failures in the past, I think I've always wanted it to work out, you know? Like, I think we all do, obviously, but for me personally, being a little bit vulnerable here is like I've always felt like I've had a lot of things in my life in check for the most part. I work really hard, I'm pretty consistent, I'm very disciplined in the way that I approach things. And my dating life was always just like fail, 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 fail. And I always wanted it to work so hard, so I would try so hard. And when you're dating, you also have to understand that they're their own person too. And you have to understand to the best of your ability, because obviously you'll never truly understand someone's perspective from their lens because it's their lens. But you have to be sympathetic to what they go through. And you learn that even through dating too. Like, you have to like proactively be dating, proactively be trying to work with your partners to understand their life, their emotions, what they're going through. And if you're constantly forcing yourself onto them, not like in that way, but like forcing yourself in terms of like your personality, your belief system, what you want to accomplish day to day, like that can definitely rub a lot of people the wrong way, especially if you're in the wrong relationship. And I think a lot of us experience that or have experienced that. And I think you have to kind of go through these struggles to kind of understand these things. And that's with not just dating, like I mentioned, but like even podcasting, streaming, making music, TV, or acting, I should say. It just depends on the dynamic that you're trying to go for. And I think, excuse me, a lot of us will struggle with that and how things go. And I've came into this like this theme of this podcast like literally this week, because I was not gonna do an episode originally this week. I was gonna just not record for this week, and I'm going to New Hampshire next weekend with my girlfriend. I wasn't planning on recording that weekend, obviously, since I'll be away. So that was 2 weeks off of not doing podcasts, and I was talking to her, and I was just saying, I don't want to force anything. I don't want to make content just to make content, because, like I mentioned on several episodes, it dilutes things. It just doesn't feel like I want to do it, and I feel like people could hear that and feel that in my energy. People do like the solos, I guess, for the consistent listeners. They do appreciate my opinion on things, and I appreciate them for giving that feedback. But I always wanted this podcast to be about my guest. So when I was telling her all this, like I was like, if I think of something, I will do a solo. And it wasn't until like maybe like Wednesday night into Thursday and then Thursday into Friday. I was like, don't force it. Like, and I feel like that made a good theme for a podcast because a lot of us do, like I mentioned, force things, and you don't want to be forcing shit. Like it's not good for the energy that you're putting out. And I was like, I could just make a whole podcast on this, make content on the fact that I didn't want to make content. And I was like, that's kind of a cool concept within itself. And even like thinking deeper into that idea of don't force it is control what you can control. And that will probably be a different episode at some point. But in the midst of not forcing things, like you also have to focus on things that you can control. Like you can't control someone else's emotions in a relationship. You can't control how they feel, what they believe, what they think, how they process what you're saying to them. And you have to just allow things to just be sometimes. And myself has always struggled with that because like you want things to work out, you want people to feel happy, you want people to feel loved, but you can't force that feeling onto them. And that's like a tough concept for a lot of people, including myself, for a long time to grasp. I mean, I'm still learning that from time to time where I might mess up in my own relationship or talking to other people on a podcast and like trying to get opinions across. Like you can't force your belief onto them. Like you have to allow them to process things. And by doing that, they'll appreciate you, and hopefully in return they allow you to be too as well. Like you want to be able to be yourself. So in allowing others to be themselves, you're hopefully allowing yourself to be yourself too, and they'll allow that as well. And I think that goes into whole concept of forcing things, because when you start forcing it and the conversation just doesn't feel as great. Anyone who's done content can probably understand that if they do podcasts or interview styles, like you might have an episode here or there where it feels like you're pulling teeth and the person might not be as willing to give as you are to give. And that happens. Some people are just less comfortable behind a microphone. Some people are less comfortable in interview styles about themselves. Some people just want to talk topics, not about their personality and their family and who they are. And that's totally understandable. You got to allow people to be. And you got to understand, especially as a host, too, when you're navigating these conversations, that you can't force the same talking point onto every single person. You have to, like, kind of like dig a little bit and figure out what they like and what they enjoy, and then guide the conversation to that so they feel more comfortable, so the conversation isn't forced, and it will just be a lot more digestible by the listeners and enjoyable on the hands of the guest and the host as well. I think that's like very important as well. Um, so kind of like my whole idea with recording this episode was to not force content. And my advice to people is don't force it. Do things organically, do things naturally. If you're not feeling recording a podcast, writing a song, or acting out a skit, going to the gym, whatever it is, don't force it. It's okay to take that step back. It's okay to collect yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, and all that, and then do what comes naturally. If it's a rest day, it's a rest day. If you want to go get a drink, go get a drink. If you want to sleep in and take a nap, do that. Don't force yourself to do things if you don't want to. Obviously, you have to understand the balance between sometimes you got to just do things and sometimes it's okay to take a break. You know what that balance is. And if you teeter into one or the other, you got to make sure you have enough self-awareness to check yourself on that. Because I can't tell you what's what for you. Like for me, I know that I need to try to go to the gym at least anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week. If I start getting to that 2 number, I'm probably slacking. I need to like check myself and get back into it. And I have to force myself to do it. Because sometimes you have to force yourself to do things to get them done. Because sometimes things are good for you, but you don't want to necessarily do them all the time. You have to do them. Like there's certain things, especially as an adult, once you get to that certain age, have to be done. You can't push them off onto someone else. You can't push them off later in the week. Like you just have to do them. Sometimes you do have to force yourself to do things, but that comes with the self-awareness, like I mentioned, to check yourself, to understand what you need to do and what you need to accomplish in a day in order for you to be successful in that day. It's super important, and I don't think enough people understand that balance of things. Like life is all about a balance. And that's something that I've come into this year where it's not so much about creating the podcast, trying to make a name for myself and get X number of followers, X number of views. Like no, just do it because you want to do it and do it because you enjoy it. And you have to constantly check in with that idea, that goal. Because if you don't, it can become stale. It becomes kind of like less motivating to you, and it might not align with what you actually want going forward. So I think it's always important to recheck with yourself to make sure that you're not veering off the path that you want to go on. And the path can change. It's not like a hard paved road that you have to stay on. It's okay to change gears and focus on something else. And that's the whole mindset with not forcing things, is allowing things to just be sometimes is really important, and just going with the flow. And I definitely have pushed back on that concept in the past of like, I kind of hate how people just like go with the flow and do whatever, man. Like we're just hanging out, life is just whatever. Like there is value to that, and I'm not going to knock that completely, because I am sometimes a very rigid person, so I can get kind of caught up in my emotions and like my dreams and my goals, and creates anxiety for myself, and I get frustrated and when things aren't happening as fast as I want them to. And you have to kind of check in with yourself and be like, yo, like it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen the next day. Life is a journey. I know it's corny, but you need to understand that in order to make progress in your own life. Long term goals, short term goals, day to day goals. Like the short term goals could be 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 4 months, 6 months. Long term, 6 months to a year, 1 year to 2 years, 1 year to 5 years, 5 years, 10 years. Like you needed to define these things for you. And I know it's tough to look at the future when things in our country and the economy and like politics is so up and down, and it's scary. Housing costs are super difficult to wrap your head around, especially as millennial. You're getting older, you want to move out of your parents eventually. Rent costs are so high, car payments are extremely high. Like things are tough. Like, but at the same time, we have to figure out how to navigate these things. And it goes back into this concept of, should we force things? Should we not force things? How do we approach things in the most healthy manner that work with us as people? And like I said, like I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm just an average everyday person giving my opinions on things and having a talking point that I think is valuable for a lot of people. And I'm giving my opinion on that. So I can't define what is forcing it for you. Only you can do that. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about things. And I don't want to turn this into like a super big rant, but piggybacking off of the relationship stuff, like currently right now, like I'm in a very like happy and healthy relationship, and I appreciate my girlfriend so much in the way that she allows me to kind of just be. Like there's never been a time where like I felt like I was like asking or begging for her attention, or asking or begging her for to hang out, or asking or begging for her love and affection. It's just been always there. It's always given to me because she knows I deserve it, and she knows that she deserves it as well, and I give that right back to her tenfold if I can. And I always try to do everything I'm supposed to do and treat her in the manner that she deserves, and she treats me in the way that I feel like I deserve. And that's what creates a really great relationship. And having that conversation very early on, and actually seeing that we agree on so many different things in terms of relationships, was unlike anything I've experienced in the past. And it didn't feel forced. It never once felt forced. And this is like hammering home on that don't force it mentality. When you meet the right person, you don't need to force things with them. You don't need to ask the who are we questions. You just know. And I always thought that was like cliche and shit like that, but you do. And it's organic, it's genuine, it's real. And having that love for the first time like I am experiencing right now is something that I wish for everybody. And for the people that do struggle with wanting a relationship, wanting a marriage, wanting a family, you have to allow things to be. And I was someone who struggled with that for so fucking long, but you have to just let things be. And once you allow that space to kind of exist, the right people will navigate towards that space because they feel comfortable. They don't feel stressed. They don't feel pressured. Once that space is created, it works not just for relationships, for your friendships, for your family members. It's a good energy to be in where people are allowed to just be who they are. And it allows for creativity. It allows for love. It allows for growth and success. There's going to be failures and fallbacks and things like that. But when you have a good network of people in a space where it's very creative and loving and supportive, that breeds a lot of good things. And I would really encourage people to reevaluate their lives and how they approach things in their day-to-day life. But I wanted to make sure that I got on this podcast, kind of talked about this a little bit. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much for people that are listening. I'm trying to keep this short and sweet. But I'll leave one big talking point. Don't force it. Be yourself. Be genuine and allow things to be. So many times when we're going through our life, we want things to be a certain way and we'll apply pressure in areas so they hopefully work in that way. But realistically, that's not the way that you should approach that. You should be real, relax, focus on what you want, communicate that to the people around you so they are aware of what you're trying to accomplish and what you want in your life. But don't force them to be someone that they're not. Don't force your job to be something it's not. Like, don't force your content to be something it's not. Do it because you want to do it. Do it because you enjoy it. Love the people because you want to love the people. Hang out with people because you want to hang out with people. Don't do things for other people just because you feel obligated to do that. Do it because you want to do it. Be supportive, be caring, be loving, and I think you'll bring in the right energy to you. So I think that's a good way to kind of wrap up this podcast about don't force it or don't stop forcing things in your life. And I kind of enjoyed sitting behind this microphone and doing this kind of concept based solo. So like I said, control what you can control might be a future episode. Stay tuned for that. I'll probably keep that in my bank memory. So hopefully if someone unfortunately cancels, I have like a theme, I guess, to record my next episode. But I have a lot of great episodes coming up. I've recorded a lot of great episodes this year. So if you've missed episodes this year, please go check out some of them. I've had so many great guests that do so many great things, and I can't shout them out enough. Like, without people like that to come on this podcast, I wouldn't have a podcast. So I always encourage people to go look at their stuff, listen to their stuff, check out their pages, support their businesses. Like, there's a lot of great people in this world. You just have to take the time to actually talk to them and hear their points of view. So if you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, share with their family, share with your grandma. You can check it out at the Carroll Connection on simplecast.com. Also, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you'd like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search the Carroll Connection. It should pop up right for you. And like I said, if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll, at the Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. So, till next time, guys, peace.